You're listening to Building the Broncos with Nick Kendell and Carl Dumler, Broncos country's leading draft and scouting analysts. Get on over to milehighhuddle.com to sound off on all things Broncos.
Hello there, Broncos country. It is once again time for another episode of Building the Broncos. I am your host, Carl Dumler, and with me today, of course, is my good friend, Mr. Nick Kendell, and we are joined by a special guest, Mr. Jon Ledyard of Pewter Report. And very excited to have both of you on here. Nick, how's it going out there?
Doing pretty well. Looks like we're going to break the 50-degree temperature this upcoming weekend. So Get me to Friday, get me to Saturday, get me to Sunday. I'm ready for it. It's going to be sunny too, so I'm ready to soak in all that vitamin D.
John, how are you doing, buddy?
Hey, I'm doing great, guys. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it. Can't relate to the warm weather, though, out here in Pittsburgh. Wait till I get down to Tampa. Maybe when I get down to Tampa Bay, then I'll be able to relate. That's what I hear.
That sounds very nice. I'm heading out to the mountains. We just had an ice storm come through here last night, so we'll see how that goes with roads. But yeah, I'm kind of excited to get out in the mountains, do some skiing. But before we do that, we get the awesome opportunity to talk some more draft, especially with the combine coming up starting Sundays when some of the players will start finally reporting there. But we also want to let you know that make sure that you're following Jon Ledyard. You can find him at Ledyard NFL Draft. And also make sure you go there and wish him a happy birthday. He just turned 30 this past Wednesday. Is that right?
30 on Wednesday. Yep.
Oh, man.
Going younger every year.
Yeah. Well, I'm still the old fart on the show here, I guess. That stinks. But no, glad we could have you on here. But make sure you're also following us on Twitter. You can find me at Carl Dumler MHH and Nick at Nick Kendell MHH. And make sure you can follow the podcast Twitter account at BTB Football Pod and subscribe to our show wherever you listen to podcasts and leave us a rating. Also, don't miss out on all of our great off-season content at milehighhuddle.com of the Maven Coalition and Sports Illustrated. Also know that our podcast is powered by Overtime Media.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
Living with chronic pain is the worst. It's more than a feeling of discomfort. It can affect your whole life. Many of our listeners probably have some type of pain that has prevented them from relaxing and sleeping or stopped them from exercising. I know I have. Perhaps it's been ongoing for a few weeks now and hasn't improved with any of the treatments they've tried. Enter Omax Health. If you're looking to get rid of nagging muscle and joint pain immediately while providing long-lasting recovery, then you need to try the natural breakthrough pain relief solution, CryoFreeze CBD Roll-On, developed by Omax Health. This non-prescription, triple-action pain relief roll-on is specially formulated to block pain receptors, reduce inflammation, and provide and improve muscle and joint flexibility. The best part is, this 100% natural CBD-powered remedy works its magic within 10 minutes of application, and the relief lasts up to 8 hours, which is much longer than the over-the-counter products. Omax Health is offering our listeners 20% off a full bottle of CryoFreeze CBD Pain Relief Roll-On plus free shipping. This discount, you guys, also applies towards any product site-wide. Just go to omaxhealth.com today and enter code OVERTIME. That is OMAXhealth.com and enter code OVERTIME to get 20% off CryoFreeze and site-wide.
All right, and welcome back to Building the Broncos. We are joined by Jon Ledyard today, and very excited. We're going to be talking trench warfare today, and I know that's not everybody's cup of tea, but for the Denver Broncos, it better be, because right now there's about 3 or 4 positions on the offensive line that are question marks. They could be looking at needing at least 2 starters on the defensive line. So a lot of these names that we're going to be bringing up, there's a good chance at least a few of them are going to end up on the Broncos. And so I thought we'd start with the defensive line. And John, I guess let's just start here at the top. We have Javon Kinlaw and Derek Brown that have really distinguished themselves from the rest of the class. Why is it that they are so much above the other guys?
I think for Brown, it's the consistency now over a couple of seasons where everybody thought he was going to declare last year and be a first-round pick. He's continued to come back to school and get better. So I think that's really been the difference for him, is that in a weak class, I mean, he's been a kind of a good run stuffer, and I think that he's gotten even better and more consistent, I'd say, in that role. Where the first time I studied Derek Brown would have been his 2000 2017 tape in preparation for the 2018 season, because everybody kind of figured after that 2018 season he would declare. He didn't. He goes back for senior year, plays 2019, continues to get better and better. And that last year's class, if you remember, was a really good interior defensive line class. This one I think is a pretty bad interior defensive line class. So I don't know that Derek Brown is the typical, if you think of the best defensive tackles to come out the past couple years, I don't know if you would say Derek Brown is on their level just because he isn't a dominant pass rusher right now, and a lot of those other guys were, but he is a dominant run defender, and he really grew as a pass rusher. And I think there's like no way in my mind I can imagine Derek Brown being a bust in the NFL. I just think he's going to be a very good starter for a long time. So I think that's where he comes in. It just feels very safe. You've seen it consistently against the best competition in college football. So you feel very good about picking Derek Brown. I think it's very, very low likelihood in my mind that he's going to be a bust. And then Javon Kinlaw is a little bit more of a risky pick, but I think what you love about Kinlaw, also a guy that came back to school when it was rumored I was actually told he was leaning toward coming out last year, and then he ended up going back to school because he thought he could be a first-round pick. And last year, if he come out, he would have been a day 2 pick probably. And this year, I think he felt like he could be a first-round pick, and he probably will be now. The depth of the defensive line class has something to do with it. But Kinlaw, it's this explosive athleticism combined with this unbelievable build and motor that he has. Not as refined or polished or as consistent as Derek Brown, but probably a higher ceiling and able to impact the game maybe behind the line of scrimmage as a disruptive presence a little bit more. So to me, those two guys, I'm not going against the grain there at all. They are clearly the best 2 interior D linemen in the class, in my opinion.
Which one would you rank above the other?
It's a good question. I have to finish both of them before I would give like an absolute answer. I think it really, and this is the answer that most people don't like to hear. And I do have hard takes on certain players and stuff, but a lot of the time it's about what makes the most sense. I think if your defensive line is kind of founded on guys shooting gaps and getting up the field and being disruptive behind the line of scrimmage, and you don't care as much about holding the point of an attack and dominating in that way, then I think that Kinlaw may be more of your cup of tea. There are defenses that are just predicated on different things. There are players who are better at certain things, and they may fit schemes better because of that. So I think because the two players are fairly different in the way that they win, I think that Kinlaw is the guy maybe that you would want if you're willing to take a little more of a risk, maybe if you had a defensive line coach that you really trusted to develop and get guys to where they're supposed to be. He's compared often to Chris Jones, who is also a little bit raw coming out. I think a little bit more developed than Kinlaw, but I think, and Jones went in the second round, and then he's a top 3 defensive tackle in the NFL probably. And so I think because of that, you're going to see teams get a little bit more excited about a guy like that. But the Chiefs have a great defensive line coach, and that helped Chris Jones' development a ton, whereas he could have landed somewhere else and perhaps not turned out quite as well. So that's going to be part of the question too, is that do you think that your D-line coach and your guys working with Kinlaw can get him to his peak? Because if you do, then he's probably going to end up better than Derek Brown someday. But if you don't, he could be – I don't think he'll bust because he just works so hard. But I don't think he could be as consistent as he should be, as his skill set would suggest he should be. So it does depend a little bit about the fit and where you're kind of willing to take the risk. But I would say Derek Brown's probably the safer player of the two.
And do you have a specific game for each player that would highlight, the maximum potential of each guy?
Well, I think for Derek Brown, anybody that you could see him against elite competition is going to be the best tape you can watch. I feel that way about all prospects, basically. If you have tape against great competition, that's really the only tape I'm super interested in seeing. I'll watch more games if I need to, but I always try to watch the best competition before I give an evaluation. So for Brown, LSU was Cushenberry inside for LSU and Damian Lewis, and those guys just had battles all game long, and he won more than he lost, and they doubled him a good bit, and he was just a force. So I think because of that, I would say LSU for Derek Brown from this past season, although there's plenty of good ones. I'm not sure if there's one tape that stands out for Javon Kinlaw or not right now. He flashes in every game, and I think he did the same a year ago. There were these crazy flashes from Javon Kinlaw. I think it is a little bit more about being consistent, and I think he'll be better in a different scheme too, Javon Kinlaw. I think he got doubled and tripled a lot. They played a lot of 3-man fronts, and I just think he's going to be a better player in a different scheme in the NFL, where he's way less responsibility and doesn't move around as much. I would keep things very simple for him early on and just let his traits kind of go to work as much as possible.
So you think he'd be pretty good between, say, a guy like Bradley Chubb and Von Miller?
I mean, that certainly wouldn't hurt. It doesn't hurt to have two guys like that. He didn't exactly have that at South Carolina.
That is for sure. Well, I guess you kind of answered a lot of our questions here. I appreciate that. But kind of talk about the highest ceiling, you said kind of Javon Kinlaw, depending a little bit on scheme there a little bit. But I guess with Derek Brown, how do you see a team really maximizing his talent on the field?
I think he can play any technique, and that's something that's pretty unique. And Kinlaw may be able to do that too eventually. But I think with Derek Brown, I think he can play anywhere inside, and you feel really good about him. I mean, he can handle centers, he can handle guards. I mean, he can handle tackles if you needed him to. He's not gonna bring you that speed that you want off the edge, but he does. He has a good first step, super powerful. So to be able to play nose in some sub packages, and you can bring in a guy who's maybe you kick somebody from the edge down and play him at 3 technique, and he can let Brown play over the center and a guard and occupy 2 blockers, and he can still push the pocket in those situations, and then everybody else has one-on-one matchups. And so a guy like that's going to attract attention just because physically he can body up some of these offensive linemen. So I think that's why he's so attractive to the NFL, I think, is that there's just this pro-ready body and technique. And yes, his pad level is probably always going to be high. If you don't know, that's like the big thing with Derek Brown. A couple of years ago, I was just like, he plays too high. And now he still plays too high, but it just doesn't even matter because his hands are so good and he's so strong that a lot of the time that doesn't even bother him. There are players like that in the NFL. Chris Jones, actually, I know we've compared him to Kinlaw, but he's kind of like that in that he's just so big and strong. DeForest Buckner's like that. They're just so big and strong that even though their pad level isn't great, they're still able to win 1v1 and even 1v2 more consistently than other guys just because they're so strong and their technique's so good. They know where to hit blockers. They know how to attack them with their hands. And so I think because of that, I really feel great about Brown kind of reaching whatever he can be in the NFL. I don't know that he'll ever be this fast twitch, work to the edge of pass rushers and beat them. You see the top pass rushers in the NFL. They know how to get on a blocker's edge. Aaron Donald, Cam Hayward, Chris Jones, all these top interior guys who are great pass rushers. They know how to get on a blocker's edge and work half man. And I think Brown knows how to do it, and there's flashes of it, but he is not a guy that's quick to get to half man. So you might see some more slow burn, push the pocket type wins as a pass rusher. He'll probably have a couple 4-sack seasons, and then he'll all of a sudden have a 10-sack season when quarterbacks are running into his lap as he's pushing the pocket. And so he'll have a little more fluctuation maybe in sack production, but I think consistency on tape and grading is kind of always going to be there for him. I just think he's going to be a really good, solid player. You can play him at nose or 3, and I think he can move around between the 2, and he can give you a lot of flexibility up front.
Well, we've had a lot of questions lately, and I know his name's not here with these 2, but AJ Epinesa. Do you view him as a guy that maybe can move into like that 3-4 defensive end, that 5-tech spot instead of being a true edge player?
Yeah, setup question here. I'm sorry, Nick, but I'm not that big of a fan of AJ Epinesa, although I will say that I do think you're kind of right in that there's some flexibility with AJ Epinesa that whenever you draft him, that'll be one of the more attractive things about him is that when he got kicked inside, when Iowa did kick him inside, which, I mean, it's hard to say they didn't kick him inside enough because maybe they didn't have any other edge rushers, but for him, I thought his best tape as a pass rusher kind of came inside because a lot of the time he can kind of get there with a blocker 1v1 against the guys he faced in college where he's in a good position, but he just doesn't have great athleticism to finish. So like cornering and enough speed, even when I think he can run the corner maybe a little bit better than people give him credit for, but he just has no speed up the arc. So it takes him so much time. Some guys can corner, but they just don't have no speed. So they never have the opportunity to really corner. And so because of that, just take that out of the equation with Epinesa and have him rush inside more often. Now he's on a linear path. All he has to do is work to the edge of a blocker, which he does pretty well with his hands. And he's closer to the ball, so he's more likely to be a little more consistent in terms of recognizing the snap and getting off the ball quickly. So I like him a little bit more inside where he'll have some 1v1 battles, and with his length, I think he can win. So I think his versatility is a key for him. The one thing I'll push back on is when people say, is AJ Epinesa, do you like him as a 5-tech and a 3-4 scheme or something like that? That just means like a tight shade on the outside shoulder of the tackle. The one thing I'll push back on is people say that, but it's not even early 2000s anymore where that would have been in. I know that as a Steeler guy, 3-4 scheme, Aaron Smith and Brett Kiesel, like that's what they played. Kimo Von Olaf, and they played that position. Now it's just so different because you can line up in a 3-4, the first couple snaps in the game, but like throughout the game, you're only going to be in that 3-4, 15, 20% of the time, maybe. So you have to be able, if you're an edge guy, especially, an interior guy, you have a little more flexibility, but if you're an edge guy, you have to be able to rush on the edge or be like a dominant sub-package player, like a Michael Bennett would be an example of that people typically use. So I think that's the tricky part with Epinesa is, does he give you juice off the edge? Like, is he going to be one of my 2 top pass rushers in obvious pass rush situations that I want him coming off the edge? And if not, what am I going to do with him? Do I put him inside? And then if I put him inside, what percentage of snaps am I playing a guy like that inside? We're going to be on 3rd and 4. Is he coming onto the field in those situations? Because when he got double teamed at Iowa, he was gone. Like, he was off the screen. I mean, he just plays too high. Guys just washed him out completely. So you have a liability kind of wherever you play him. There's a little bit of a weakness, which is why I think his best usage in the NFL is going to be in obvious pass situations, long and late downs. He's able to be on guards inside, and he's able to play that way. And I think that's, as a pass rusher, that's where you're going to get the most value out of him. And there's certainly going to be matchups against run-heavy teams and some things like that where you're going to want to get him more edge reps. So his flexibility can be an asset for you, but his lack of ability to dominate any of those positions and be on the field consistently in all situations in those positions would just make me value him a lot less than what most people do in the draft community. Most people have him first round. I have him in the 3rd round, late 3rd round. So that's just where I see him, and that's where I see his value in the NFL.
What would make him – so a player that I've heard here in Iowa City that is thrown around to some people connected to the program is a Cameron Hayward with Pittsburgh. What's the pathway to be that kind of pass rusher from that 3-4 defensive end? Or is that something where he plays too high, you don't see that anchoring ability, that the projection there, the comp doesn't fit?
Yeah, the comp doesn't fit for exactly the reason you said, the leverage. I mean, Cam Hayward wins primarily because of leverage. But also, that's the thing. Cam Hayward and the Steelers are kind of thought of as that 3-4 team. But, I mean, Cam Hayward hardly ever plays outside the tackle. I mean, it just hardly ever happens. He's almost always inside because the Steelers are almost always in sub-packages. They hardly ever have 3 defensive linemen on the field. So, essentially, 3-4 fronts, I won't want to say they're extinct because they still exist at times, but nobody really runs 3-4 heavily enough. What happens is you
4-2-5, 3-3-5,
and you end up with 2 interior guys and you end up with 2 edge guys, and they could be standing up and they could have their hand down. And most of these defenses now, like even the Steelers, like some of these times these guys have their hands down on the edge. Some of the time they're standing up. They stop dropping guys into coverage from the edge. So, and almost everybody has kind of followed suit. Most everybody just wants 4 rushers on the field, guys that can impact the quarterback and not be a liability if you're inside. So, yeah, I mean, Hayward's almost always over the guard or over the center, most of the time over the guard. And so because of that, yeah, there is just not a lot of I don't think like Epinesa plays so high that the run game distinction is totally, you can't even compare. And then as a pass rusher, I mean, I think Cam Hayward's just evolved into this completely dominant player, to obviously a lot bigger than Epinesa, in terms of weight than Epinesa will be. And so I think that I don't even think of Cam Hayward as a 3-4 end or as a 5 tech at all. Like he's just, and I know people said that Stephon Tuitt, same type of thing coming out. But I mean, Stephon Tuitt's 315 pounds and he plays over a guard or over the center. I mean, he's just an interior pass rusher. So I think people just have to understand that 3-4 is it's just kind of dead. I mean, you might see it for a handful of snaps a game, depending on the matchup and stuff like that, but it's just not an important enough front. It's not an important enough distinction these days to warrant drafting a guy because of a fit and that type of a look, because you're just not going to be in it a very high percentage of the time.
All right. Well, you broke my heart, but that's okay.
Well, let's move on from that so Nick can recover, and we'll move on to the rest of the defensive line class here because, I mean, like I said, you got those 2 guys that have really distinguished themselves, and then we got kind of this next bunch of guys that it just kind of depends who you're talking to of how they fit and where they fit. But you got a guy like Neville Gallimore of Oklahoma, Ross Blacklock of TCU, Justin Matabuke of Texas A&M, Raekwon Davis of Alabama, Marlon Davidson of Auburn, kind of depending where you want to put him on the field, Leki Fotu of Utah, Jordan Elliott of Missouri. Those are just a few of the names, but who of that second tier really kind of sticks out to you as a guy that you just really like and think that they're being kind of underrated at this time?
I mean, I like Ross Blacklock the most of those guys that I've seen. I still have to finish Marlon Davidson, and I haven't watched Lucky Fotu much at all. Raekwon Davis to me is just, I've just lost interest. I think when he was a freshman and he was, the sacks were coming, and I was intrigued, or sophomore, whatever it was, and the sacks were coming. I was intrigued and watched his tape, and I was like, okay, a lot of his sacks were luck. He needs a lot of development as a pass rusher, and then the last 2 years he just hasn't developed at all, and I think he's gotten worse against the run. Double teams moved him, and I mean, he's still going to offer some mid-round value as a guy who's pretty good when you put him outside the guard, against the run, but I don't know that he's good enough as a pass rusher to be worth even the top 100 pick. So to me, I just don't know. I mean, his size and his frame are going to be enticing. A guy bends at the knees for a 6'6" dude. I mean, he can really play low at the point of attack, but I just don't think he gives you anything as a rusher. So I'm not sure if it's worth it. The other guys, I mean, everybody kind of has Neville Gallimore, Ross Blacklock, Justin Madweek, however you say his last name, and Jordan Elliott. They kind of have those four. I think, I mean, literally, I don't know. Marlon Davidson's mixed in there for some people depending on what position he plays, so we'll get to him in a second. Those four are kind of almost always in the next group, and I guess you could say Davidson is working his way into that conversation as well after the Senior Bowl one practice that he had, I think. So to me, I like Blacklock the most, but I think all of them have their issues and concerns. Nobody's on the level of the first two. Blacklock, I just like him because I think he's an awesome athlete and he plays so hard. I mean, he's got concerns in that defense at TCU. It's very hard to scout because they just move gaps every play. So he just crosses somebody's face and shoots a gap, and crosses somebody's face and shoots a gap. So you don't really get a great feel for how he holds the point of attack or takes on blockers or uses his hands because he's just kind of always flashing through gaps. But his ability to like absorb contact and keep his balance and then make a play on the other side of the ball is absolutely wild. So the way he moves, I don't think he's going to be 330. I think he's listed at 330. That's just insane to me. I don't think he doesn't even look 330. So I don't know what he's going to weigh, but his ability to play that way at his size just gives me the most hope that he could figure it out technically if he lands in a scheme that kind of uses him the right way. So I like him a lot because of that. Madweek's just kind of up and down. There's like some instances of good pass rush. I don't think he's a great athlete. I don't think he has great physical tools. I could see him being the guy that goes last out of those five that we kind of are talking about right now, just because I don't know if there's enough in the toolbox that teams are really going to love him. What's he going to weigh in at? He's kind of a tweener a little bit. He looks like on tape to me. I don't know if he's going to hit 300 or we'll see. Maybe I'm totally wrong on that, but Jordan Elliott is, I think, most of the top draft guys, the guys that I would say are the best in the biz. He's most of their number 3. I just don't really see it with Jordan Elliott at all. Like I'm not very excited about him, just to be honest. Like I don't think we're talking about a great athlete or an explosive dude. I'm definitely powerful. Started to put it together for the first time really ever this past year at Missouri. He can move some people on occasion, but not a polished pass rusher, doesn't really threaten off the snap or with speed. I don't know how the NFL is going to feel about him. I don't think he's going to test really well. I know it's always the trendy thing to say is that there's depth at this position when no one else is talking about there being depth at that position. But I really just don't think there's much depth at the defensive line position. I mean, some of these guys can help you, for sure they can play in the league, but that's the deepest position in the NFL right now is the interior D-line. So, guys that can play, they're just, to me, those guys that's not a very special thing just because you're getting guys every year in day 3 that are coming, interior D-line and running backs, you get guys that can get the job done at those spots on day 3 all the time. So, if you're just looking to get the job done, fine. But if you're looking for game changers up front, pass rushers, guys that make plays behind the line of scrimmage that are disruptive, I like Blacklock's potential the most. Then there's Gallimore, who is probably going to kill the combine. But, I mean, this dude is the most inconsistent dude on tape, and he is just all over the place. He plays with his hair on fire, but he falls down all the time, and he's a little smaller and shorter armed for the position. And so some guys just kind of toss him around. He gets back up, and he's running, and he doesn't really have any pass rush moves or plan. And he's just a ball of crazy energy. And it was the same way at the Senior Bowl. You watch his one-on-ones. Once in a while, he hits this move, and you're like, who is this guy? And then he'll have 4 rushes where it doesn't even look like he's thought about what he's going to do next. So he is just super raw. He's a fun player. I think somebody's going to take him high just because he's a good athlete, but I just don't, I'm not exactly sure where he wins at the next level without a lot of development, even though I like him. And then Marlon Davidson's probably the wild card right now because he does have a little bit of pass rush ability, but Auburn played him on the edge a lot, and they used him on twists a lot. So he got a lot of free looks at rushes. How he tests is going to be really big. So I think he could be the number 3 guy, or he could be 6 or 7 on that list. Like I said, I need to do more tape work on Davidson too because he's a little harder to get a feel for because he played on the edge at he's 297 pounds at the Senior Bowl, so we'll see what he comes in at the Combine, but you're just not playing on the edge in the NFL 297 pounds. So everybody just needs to get on board with the fact that this is a full-time interior defensive line player, period, and then try and evaluate him from there and see what you got with his grading.
And before we move on here to get a break, because you're giving a lot of good insight here, and I don't want to keep you too long, but you made a point here that I wanted to circle back to about how this defensive line right now is probably the deepest and most talented it's been in the league as we've seen in a long time. How does that impact your view on going defensive line in the first round? Because every year, I mean, obviously everybody wants an Aaron Donald or Chris Jones, but you're seeing plug and play interior defensive linemen in the free agency landscape year after year where you can get guys. Does that mean you're a little bit less likely to take a Derek Brown or Javon Kinlaw early, or do you just throw that out the window?
Well, just before.
No, I wouldn't be. Yeah, I wouldn't be less likely because the guys who are difference makers are still there's a big distinction still in the league between the top guys and their impact and the guys that are kind of after them and the tiers after them. There's a lot of guys who can play. There's still only a handful of elites. And so if you think you've got guys that can really play and make impact, like I said, if you can create losses for the other team in the run game or in the pass game, that means, pressures, sacks, tackles for loss, plays where you're penetrating and creating tackles for loss or opportunities for tackles for loss. Those are the kind of guys that you have to take, period. You know what I mean? Those are high priority guys, because when you've created a loss for offense, the percentage chance of them continuing a drive, getting a first down, scoring on the drive, all of that goes down. So that's why I'd say, somebody, let's use Derek Nottie, for example, from a couple years ago that you plays in your division for the Chiefs. I love Derek Nottie's tape, and I put a 3rd round grade on him because I just can't value anything he does because he doesn't do anything behind the line of scrimmage, but he's a rock solid nose tackle who stops the run and helps them keep things to 2 to 3 yard gains and things like that. He does his job. So a guy like that, who can do that at a high level, that's awesome, but they aren't valuable enough for me to take them high in a draft because they don't create net losses for the opposition and make things. It's a defense all it is today is it's about losses, turnovers, losses. That's what it is. If you can't create those things to defense, you're just probably not going to be very good. There's too much variability. There's too many good players on offense, too many good schemes. You're going to get got when you go up against the top teams. So you have to be able to create those things. So if you're players who can do those things, I take you high. And I think Kinlaw has the potential to do those things at a really high level. Derek Brown's already doing those things at high level, especially against the run. So there's still guys I would value really high, and I would feel they play really important positions. It's just that after that, I think all these guys are fairly comparable. There might be more upside. So if you feel again, you have the coaching staff and the situation to unlock a lot of that potential, then take those kind of guys like a Blacklock, maybe even a Gallimore, as crazy as he is. But if you don't, then go for some of these guys who might be a little bit more, maybe you wait a little bit and you find a guy in the 4th round who can do what you need him to do. You don't need him to be, this guy that plays 80% of your snaps and hits the quarterback 5 times a game. You just need him for a certain role. So it just kind of depends on what you're looking for at the position.
Good. Again, before we take a break here, I want to emphasize the point that you made about how today's NFL, you're not going to hold people to under 300 yards and 0 points. It's about creating explosive defensive plays and turnovers. So something we like to highlight on here. That's a really good point. So we should probably take a break.
Well, I was going to add one last point here you'd said some of those explosive players of trying to go for them. Chris Jones might be even hitting the market, and he's a top 3 player at the position. There's a real chance of that depending on how the Chiefs decide to spend their money. But
the Chiefs would be so stupid to let that happen. I cannot emphasize it enough. It would be one of the dumbest moves of the offseason because he's a complete difference maker every time he's on the field for the defense. Every single human being on the face of the earth can see it. How would you let that go? You don't even have that great of a defense or that many stars. Why would you? It just makes no sense. The fact that he's even still available and they haven't signed him just give him whatever money he wants. He's worth it. Those guys like that make all the difference in the world. We could see it in every game he played in this season, especially in the end. I don't know. Just makes no sense why they would let him hit the market.
That hurts my heart because I absolutely love Chris Jones heading into that draft. But all right, well, we should flip over to the other side of the ball. We're going to take a quick break, folks. Do not go anywhere. It's probably what you've been waiting for if you're a Bronco fan. Offensive tackles next. Don't go anywhere.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
Every night, local police departments across America receive hundreds of calls from burglar alarms. The vast majority of the time, they have no idea whether the alarm is real. Is there really a crime going on or not? All the alarm company can tell them is the motion sensor went off. Simply Safe Home Security, though, is different. If you're like me, and you're one of those guys who's hypersensitive to every single sound and is tired of having to sleep with a knife under your bed, Simply Safe is the solution. If there's a break-in, Simply Safe uses real video evidence to give police an eyewitness account of the crime. That means police dispatch up to 350% faster than for a normal burglar alarm. You get comprehensive protection for your entire home. Outdoor cameras and doorbells alert you to anyone approaching your home. Entry, motion, and glass break sensors guard inside. Plus, Simply Safe protects your home from fires, water damage, and carbon monoxide poisoning. It's 24/7 monitoring by live security professionals. You can set up your system yourself, no tools are needed, or Simply Safe can do it for you. And it's only 50 cents a day. That's peace of mind with no contracts. Visit simplysafe.com/overtime and you'll get free shipping and a 60-day risk-free trial. You've got nothing to lose. Go now and be sure you go to simplysafe.com/overtime so they know that our show sent you. That's simplysafe.com/overtime.
Alrighty, and we are back here with Jon Ledyard of Pewter Report. Guys, make sure you follow him on Twitter. That's at Ledyard NFL Draft, Ledyard. And we're going to talk probably the position that, if you look on Facebook or Twitter, if you have any sort of draft content, odds are 50% of the comments are going to be in all caps screaming about the offensive tackle position. And this looks like a pretty darn good offensive tackle position, specifically at the top. So I guess we'll kick it off here. Who is your number one offensive tackle at this point?
Jedrick Wills, for sure, from Alabama. It's not really close at number one for me. I think he's definitely better than the rest of the guys. But I would also say Wills is probably one of the best prospects overall in the class. I think maybe Dane Brugler was the first guy to start saying that. And back before I was in the draft game, I remember him saying that. I was like, I don't know why this isn't consensus. I'd watched Wills for a couple of years, and he was a completely dominant player, and he got better this past season. I'd seen a lot of Alabama, and I hadn't seen a ton of Iowa with Tristan Wirfs or any of Houston at this point, because I wasn't really following prospects. I knew their names, but that was kind of it. So I was like, man, these Wirfs and Jones must be amazing if somebody's going to put them above Wills, because I hadn't seen any of Mekhi Becton, from Louisville. So I hadn't seen those guys play at all. I didn't watch those three teams, much during I'd seen Andrew Thomas a little bit, and I was like, I definitely think Wills is better. So I was kind of surprised that it took a little while, but then now I feel like most people are kind of, okay, Wills is the best tackle in the class. And I don't know how the NFL is going to feel, because his arms are probably going to be a little shorter than they like, but we're going to be back to that age-old discussion about arm length with Jedrick Wills probably.
Yeah, well, Tristan Wirfs might have that same discussion, because there's a lot of people wanting to push him into guard as well. I wanted to talk about Andrew Thomas is another guy you'd mentioned there. He was probably a few months ago, everybody had him as that top 5 pick in the draft, easily number 1 offensive tackle. What has led to kind of this fall down boards to the point where now a lot of people are starting to see him in mock drafts go in the 20s, late teens kind of area? What's kind of changed in the viewpoint of him?
I don't know. I mean, I can't speak for other people other than myself. I kind of always have watched Andrew Thomas, because when you're watching casually, you watch the SEC a lot because there's great football in there. And so I always would watch Andrew Thomas, and I would just think he's a good player, but there are clear issues. Like, he's not the athlete that some of the other top guys are, and that your top prospect typically is. So I guess I was a little surprised when people were saying he was the consensus kind of top guy. And again, I was like, part of it's that he plays left tackle, and Wills and Wirfs play right tackle, and people still have in their minds that left tackle is the premier spot when it just doesn't make any difference at all. Just get 2 good tackles. They both have to pass protect. And so guys might be better on one side or the other. And so I think Wills and Wirfs may have to prove that. But I like Andrew Thomas. I think he's a good player. I just don't – he's never been this top 5 type of guy, this dominant type of guy. I know that I think PFF has him right as their number one guy, and I love PFF stuff, but I just think that there's just no way you can watch Thomas and Wills to me and think that Thomas plays that position better in any facet. I don't think he does anything better than Wills. So I think the two things that Thomas will really struggle with in the league is that he kind of moved guys and was good in the run game at Georgia because his hands were good, and because he's quick enough and he's smart. I think he's played a lot and he knows what to expect from teams up front. And so I think that helped him. But he just plays so high because he has such limited flexibility that guys are going to just kind of win 1v1 against him more often. Not to say that he still can't win. Like I said, some guys they don't play low and they still find a way to get it done. And I think, they're scheme diverse at Georgia, and, he knows what he's doing, I think, and he'll be able to play early on. I just think there's physical limitations and athletic limitations with him in the run game that he's not going to be this all around, all impactful guy that consistently creates movement on every snap because of that. And then in pass protection, just range and his set points. Some guys, you'll look at Mekhi Becton, for example. Like, first of all, he's huge, but then also this just gigantic range with his first step, out of his stance. If he's setting 45 or setting vertical, he can just cover ground. So you can cover ground on that first step, but still not give up your inside lane, that B gap. Then I think that what you've done is you've just discouraged speed rushes, and speed rushes, outside edge rushes are how most tackles get beaten. And I think Thomas just doesn't do that very well. There's a limitation to him athletically in terms of his foot speed and his ability to kind of get on stance and take away the edge. Even when he's setting 45, I still think that that's an issue for him. And so I think that speed guys are going to challenge him in the NFL. I think he knows his limitations, so he is prepared to open up and kind of push these guys up the arc. But to do that, you have to give yourself up technically a little bit with your footwork, and guys who know how to counter are going to get back inside of him, and then he's going to be thinking about speed, counter, which one am I stopping? And I just think there's the potential for some limitations to really hurt Andrew Thomas at the next level because of that. Also, he may end up going back to right tackle, which he played for a little bit at Georgia too. So that flexibility may be desirable to teams, and they may see him better at right tackle than left tackle, not because one's more important than the other, because teams, for whatever reason, seem like maybe they feel a little more comfortable scheming protection for the right tackle. Maybe it's because their quarterback can see it, and they chip and then they leak out the back, and the quarterback's kind of eyes are right there because if they're right-handed and they can see. So whatever reason it is, the teams like to help on the right side more than the left. I don't know, but I think that because of that, maybe if you were at a team and they were like, okay, we know he's some limitations, but also he can be a better, there's not a lot of great right tackles in the league. He still could probably be a top 10, 15 right tackle without being that great. So maybe we still feel like we can get a lot out of him and he's worth it to us, to take him there. Then maybe you feel like if you can help him, he can still have that kind of an impact.
And for Thomas specifically, for the Broncos actually specifically, they're probably set with their tackles next season. Garrett Bowles was playing better down the stretch last year, and by all indication, they're going to roll with him at left tackle next year. And Juwan James, it's more expensive to move on from him than just to keep him. So they're looking for a guy who, obviously, if they take a tackle at 15, you want him to take a guy who's going to end up being a tackle, but they're more likely to have a starting spot this year at guard. And, maybe that's not a guy like, obviously, Josh Jones, but maybe an Andrew Thomas, maybe a Wills, maybe a Wirfs. Obviously, you don't love that, but you saw that with Laramie Tunsil with the Dolphins, and he's worked out fine, playing a year at guard and then moving to left tackle. Is that something that you could see with Andrew Thomas, or is that something where I feel like when I watch him, he's a little bit top heavy, and that might be an issue with him at guard in comparison to somebody like a Tristan Wirfs, and maybe you don't want to mess with it with a guy like Jedrick Wills.
Yeah, he's probably the guy I would least like to use a guard out of the top guys. Maybe he or Becton or Jones. Wirfs and Wills can probably play wherever you want, but I don't see that with Andrew Thomas because of the reasons you said. Again, the leverage thing. If anything, you have a lot of time you have shorter guys inside, power guys inside. Yep. The leverage just could be more of an issue, I think. And there's just. I don't know what the same thing with Laramie Tunsil. I'm glad you brought that up because it was just kind of like there was no point to doing that with Laramie Tunsil. It was stupid. Who was the guy? Brandon Albert or somebody? I don't remember who it was, but who cared? That guy's career was done. Just play him inside. He played guard before. Play Laramie Tunsil outside and just let it. That's your top pick. Just play him where he's most comfortable. Don't start his career off on a low note. So if you're taking Thomas in the first round, just play the guy at tackle. That's where you're gonna have him. So because of that, I guess maybe it wouldn't be a great fit for Denver given their current situation. And if there's better guys on the board, I mean, I think there's better guys in the class, so they might be wise for them to go another direction anyway at that point. But it all depends on, too, if you've done this in free agency, then maybe you're thinking, okay, we're going to take a tackle here because we love the guy, and next year Bowles is going to be out of here and we're going to play him. So maybe that's their mindset.
Yeah, and I do think Juwan James, this was before I really started watching tape, but I think his sophomore year he did play guard at Tennessee. So I guess that is an option as well, but probably not as likely. So just something to think about here for the Broncos with a tackle. However, Pro Football Focus just released an interesting study piece where if you're finding tackles, odds are you need to take him round one, and especially with the value, because veteran offensive tackles get paid at an inflated rate beyond any other position. So really an interesting area to think about there.
Well, I had one more question here about these top 5 guys. A guy that you'd mentioned there, Mekhi Becton. Do you think there's going to be any issues conditioning-wise, just his size? Because, I mean, we're talking about Denver. We're playing at altitude. Is that something that you would weigh in on, considering him as a possibility there at, say, 15 for the Broncos?
They might. I've never been to Denver, so I don't know what the impact could be like. It may be something they have to measure. I think the thing with Mekhi Becton that's different than other big guys, and I don't know, this man, he doesn't mean he's in great shape, or it doesn't mean it's not going to be an issue, but he's not like sloppy like other big guys. People kind of throw all big guys into one category, but like there's just a huge difference between somebody like Becton and even Trent Brown when he was coming out of college. I know Brown's cleaned it up and looks a lot different now, but it's somebody like Zach Banner and Zach Banner's another one. He's cleaned it up now. Like he plays for Pittsburgh, and he's not like he was coming out where he's real sloppy. Becton's not like that now. So there's not like a lot of bad weight on him now. Weight can be too much weight can be too much weight, good or bad. But he's not a sloppy looking guy. He doesn't have, there's a guy, Austin Jackson for USC, who doesn't weigh as much as Becton, but that guy's body is going to need a lot of work in the NFL. Where Becton, I mean, you could see pictures of him now working out. Like there's not a lot of bad weight on him. Like if he's actually 370, which probably isn't the case, but then it looks great. Then that whatever. So that I don't know if that that doesn't mean he's necessarily in great shape or that it's not going to be an issue, but I don't think he's like a sloppy bad weight. You got to get his body right type of guy for the NFL. Like, I think his body is pretty good. I think he can make an impact.
All right, well, let's move on then to the second tier kind of guys in this draft. And you just mentioned one there, Austin Jackson, of course, a guy that has probably the biggest range in this draft of where he could maybe go is Trey Adams with his injury history. At one point, people were talking about him being a top 10 pick, and then he kept getting hurt. Where he could go, Prince Tega Wanokfo. I didn't say that quite right, but you got Ezra Cleveland, Ben Barch. Who of those guys are you really liking as maybe that kind of developmental player that you can get for the Broncos that, like I said, maybe they're not starting year 1, but year 2, you're really excited about what they could bring to the table?
Yeah, I haven't seen Niang. I haven't seen Prince Tega this year. I haven't seen Ezra Cleveland yet, so I'll reserve judgment on those guys. Also, Jack Driscoll, the other Auburn tackle, is another, and I've seen a little bit of him, and I think he's interesting too. Trey Adams, I only saw one game of him this year. I thought he played pretty well, to be honest. I'm probably – see, last year when everybody said Trey Adams was a first-round pick, when he decided to go back to school, I was like, you guys are crazy. Like he didn't look like a first-round pick at all to me. Now nobody likes him at all, and he's not even in the top 100 for most people, and – I'm probably going to end up higher on him than most people because I think he's all right. I just don't think he's first-round pick. So I have to look more at Trey Adams from this past year and see what I think of him. But I think his medicals are going to be everything. I mean, his medicals are so big because there's so much, and he's older too. So you just don't have a lot of room for error, and with a pick like that. Austin Jackson, man. I know people think he's going to go top 40, and maybe he will because the NFL doesn't make sense a lot of the time when they draft tackles, but that guy just needs a lot of work, man. Like I mentioned his body already, his footwork, coming out of his stance, he's often like a beat slow off the snap. I mean, there were defensive players getting off the ball before he'd even moved sometimes. So he just needs a lot of work on that first step and his set points. Again, we talked about establishing half man as a pass protector being so important. He just can't consistently do that, so speed guys are usually a step ahead of him, which means he has to try and chase him and push him up the arc. And counter guys in the NFL, you have to think about traits in the process with these guys rather than the results. They might win a rep technically, but you have to look at the way they're doing it, because pass rushers in the NFL are just so much better. I mean, Austin Jackson played Bradley and I and the Notre Dame guys, and those were like his best. I think those were, unless I'm forgetting somebody, in Epinesa, I think he played. And those are like his best competition, and Epinesa like cooked him, and I cooked him a couple of reps. And in my mind, those are like mid-round guys who are going to be like, solid depth rushers, contributors to it. So you're just facing a totally different tier of player in the NFL. And yes, you're going to get better coaching. You're probably going to get better. That's true. But his process just not very good a lot of the time. I actually kind of thought of him as like a poor man's Andrew Thomas. Some of the same issues. I don't think either. I know Austin Jackson's build is having this great athleticism. I didn't see that at all with him. Definitely not functional athleticism. His hips are really tight. And one of the worst things about Austin Jackson, honestly, and not to rip on him too much, but he just is so bad in the run game because he can't sustain, because he just doesn't have the mobility in his hips. Guys are going to get on your edge a little bit, and you kind of have to move and stick with them and turn, and he just can't do those things. I mean, he falls off blocks all the time. And in the zone rushing schemes that they ran at USC, he let guys through his gap constantly because he doesn't have the footwork down. He can't open that front hip up and get lateral. So there's just a lot of work needed, run and pass game with Austin Jackson. He does have great length. I think that's a really good quality about him. He was able to recover from being in a bad spot a lot of the time. I just don't think that process is going to really succeed in the NFL for him. So I'm not a huge Austin Jackson fan. The one guy I'll say too, I really like Sadiq Charles from LSU. Apparently there's, character questions out the wazoo with that guy from everything we've heard. Eric Edholm wrote about it recently for Yahoo Sports, and that was a really good piece. And so I can't, he may not get drafted at all, or he may get drafted in top 100. I don't know, and he may be a guard because he's not that long either, but the dude is unbelievably flexible and athletic for an offensive lineman. Honestly, his best reps are probably as good as anybody in the class, but they're just so inconsistent, and you never know what you're getting from him. I like him probably more than I should. I'd take a flyer on him, but I don't know the character stuff, so I say that off the tape. But then I'd probably take a flyer on him, in the third round somewhere. But if the character stuff's a concern, when the guy needs development, they better be all in on football, and if he's not, then just forget about it.
And just some self-indulgent stuff here for me. I feel like we didn't talk about it enough, but Tristan Wirfs, a guy that, like we talked about, could play guard. Some people think he is potentially a better guard than tackle. Talk to me about his fit with the Broncos. And when we messaged back and forth with the DMs earlier, you thought that he was a guy that fit the range of the Broncos picking at 15. So you're a little bit lower on him than what seems to be general consensus.
Yeah, I guess maybe. I don't know. I don't know enough about general consensus to know where I really like Tristan Wirfs. I don't know if people love him and think he's unbelievable.
I've seen a lot of top 10.
Yeah, he probably won't be in my top 10. I don't know where. I have to finish some grades. I think right now he's somewhere 10 to 16 range for me. So, but I still have a lot of guys to grade. I still have probably 12, 15 guys that I would say, I could see hypothetically being in that range. So I don't know where it'll end up exactly for me, because I am kind of a little bit late to the party with the whole process. But I really like him. He has the ability to probably do everything at a high level. I wish he played with a more of a consistent edge, because he's so strong and mobile. Guys like that just can crush people if they're engaged, and he has flashes of that. I don't want to say he's not engaged and there's no effort. I just don't think he always plays mean like some of these other guys like Becton and Wills are just always trying to destroy people. So I just don't know if he's like that, or if he's a little bit more of a finesse player than I expected coming to the tape. So maybe I was a little disappointed because of that. There's some technical things that need work with his feet, but there's no flaw that makes me really turn off Wirfs. I just think, inside a guard, the only thing I would say is that I could just see all of his issues with footwork and stuff like that again, are all fixable. It's not an athletic thing. It's just a consistency thing with him. I could see that kind of being diminished, and him being able to work in those short areas, just being way more athletic than everybody else. With his power and you're probably not going to run through him once he gets his technique down. I just don't know how you're going to beat him if he becomes really, really good at guard. Whereas tackle, it's just harder. The footwork is just harder at tackle. I know offensive linemen may balk at me saying that, but I just think it is. I think it's harder to play tackle. I don't know why that would be a hot take, but I feel like it always is when you say it, but it's just harder to play tackle. But he has all the ability to play tackle. So while I say in one breath his best play could come at guard because of just his build and, you know, his strengths there could be just so much greater than everybody else on the inside that he could be overwhelming there. I just think if a team takes him, you got to play him at tackle because he has such good tools. Again, the length may not be there, and that may matter to teams. I mean, he and Wills are the best two guys in the class probably, but the two guys I'd be most interested in. But I think that both their arm lengths are going to matter to people, even though they have good. And Wills' tape is so dominant. I don't know why you'd care about that against top competition too, for years. But you know, those are going to be talking points with both of those guys.
And one last thing before we get you on out of here, we want to thank you for sending Mike Munchak from the Steelers, your team. You're obviously covering the Buccaneers now, but you're a Steelers guy at heart, over to the Denver Broncos. And he is, obviously we didn't see incredible offensive line play for the Broncos last year. Granted, it was pretty dinged near the end, but now that Dante Scarnecchia is gone, there might not be a better offensive line coach in the NFL landscape. And the Broncos got him. You know, who knows what they're going to do first round, second round, third round, but I think the Broncos offensive line is in pretty good hands.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's something that again, what I talked about with defensive line coaches, that's something that they have to think about at that position. And that's something the Steelers thought about because they were comfortable trying to bring in a guy like Villanueva to play left tackle and not spending high-end assets on it because they just felt like Munchak could get him there. And Villanueva's been like a solid left tackle for the Steelers his whole career out of nowhere as an older dude who hadn't really played tackle. I mean, just a crazy story because of somebody like Munchak. And Marcus Gilbert was headed for being a bust, and he became one of the best right tackles in the league because of Munchak. So, again, that may be part of it is that you feel like year two with Bowles, maybe Munchak saves him. You know, I don't know exactly what they're thinking, but you may prioritize the position less than fans think you do because you trust the coach. The Steelers did it for years. It worked out terrific for them. So it may end up being the case for Denver that, you know, they just feel like we can bring in this guy, you know, as a free agent for cheap, and we think we can get the most out of our O-line still because of Munchak. And that may impact the way they draft. And based on what I know of Munchak, it might be a process worth trusting if you're a Broncos fan.
All right. Well, that was Jon Ledyard. You can find his work over at the Pewter Report. Again, you can find him at Ledyard NFL Draft. Anything you want to promote before you get on out of here?
I'll have my offensive tackle rankings up, I think, sometime before the combine. I'll just put it that way. So check out pewterreport.com. I'll have my top 10 offensive tackles. There'll still be some guys I hadn't watched, but top 10, you'll have a lot of the top names in there that I'll be talking about those rankings and where I see them winning and losing as tackles.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
All right, and welcome back. We really appreciate Jon coming on and joining us to discuss some of these players. And honestly, not that he was contrarian to most everybody else, but there were certain players that he had a little bit lower ranked than some others. And so, Nick, I guess anything really kind of stand out to you of what Jon just talked about?
Well, my heart is hurt from the AJ Epinesa talk. And I don't necessarily agree, but Jon is, you know, I'll give him props. He is as good at this as anybody that's doing it on the media side. So definitely going to send me back to the tape there. So excited to do that, a little bit apprehensive. And obviously, if you don't think very highly of Austin Jackson, you're not going to be as impressed of AJ Epinesa getting like 2.5 sacks and 2 forced fumbles against him. So that kind of makes sense. But overall, I mean, really good thought process. And I am a little bit nervous about offensive tackle for the Broncos because if they don't get one round one, maybe it's not going to happen at all. But then at the very end, he made me feel much better about it because the Mike Munchak effect.
Well, yeah, you had sent me that Pro Football Focus article about value of position of when they're drafted and how the success rate. I'd recommend anybody that can get on Pro Football Focus to go check that out because it is very high quality information. Just kind of checking out which positions really fall off, especially after the first round, and offensive tackle is one of the biggest ones. And so that definitely concerns you, but he is right. Munchak kind of counters some of that for the Broncos. And so that's a really nice part for the Broncos moving forward, that maybe it isn't quite as high priority to have to go out there and get a top guy round one just to find a successful player at the position. But so it'll be interesting to see where they go offensive tackle wise moving forward, find that developmental guy. I guess I was a little excited just because I've been a little bit lower on this guy than I know like you or Eric, his talk about Austin Jackson. I've watched a few of his games, and I just haven't always come away as impressed. I just thought he was quite the project that I didn't know that I'd really want to take on per se. I mean, I think there's high upside, but I agreed with him that there's a lot of things that you watch on tape. I think one thing that stuck out to me that he didn't really talk about too much is just how often, because he's late getting to a spot, that he is caught lunging, trying to get back into position. And then it gets him off balance and allows players to win that, especially when you get against some of those high quality players like AJ Epinesa, that he just can't completely win on that end. But I guess I want to go back here to the defensive line. I mean, you already talked about AJ Epinesa, but just looking at the class after the top two guys, are you in agreement with him that maybe they're in that second, third round where a lot of people are kind of looking for the Broncos to take a defensive lineman, that maybe that's not the best place to go?
Well, obviously it depends on fit and everything. And like he said, if you have a good defensive line coach, you can probably squeeze some value out of it. And I feel pretty good about Bill Kohler. Obviously, he pounded the table. Anecdotally, he pounded the table for Adam Gotsis, and Gotsis didn't work out like many had hoped, but I'm still okay with it. I think that it's an area that you can look to go. I mean, Jordan Elliott, Likai Fotu, et cetera, those guys can fit. But it is interesting to hear him say he's much lower on the depth of this interior defensive line class, because I feel like consensus has been it is one of the top 5 positional groups in this draft, and which is considered a pretty loaded draft overall.
Yeah, I do agree with him that a lot of these guys, they are more a nice depth piece, maybe a nice starter, but not really those guys that you see emerging to become the next Chris Jones, the next Aaron Donald kind of players. And yes, Aaron Donald's taken there early in the draft, so that kind of mutes that a little bit. But still, you're right. This is kind of a more depth kind of piece, kind of what the Broncos got last year in the draft, and taking a defensive lineman in those mid-round picks. They got a nice depth piece that has been nice for him, but do you see him emerging as a top 10 player at the position? Maybe, but the odds are pretty stacked against him. And so then that does seem to raise up spending money at the position in free agency compared to hoping that somebody can emerge from the draft. But I did like his thoughts on Mekhi Becton, because that has been a concern of his conditioning. And so hearing that he doesn't have a whole lot of fat on his body, I do worry a little bit about just anybody that size, the risk of injury increases. I mean, this is why a lot of offensive linemen, when they leave the NFL, they lose a lot of weight, because it's unhealthy to really be at that kind of weight long term in your life, really. I mean, your knees, your back, everything begins to really fall apart. So I do worry a little bit about a guy that kind of size, taking that kind of beating over and over again long term. How long is he going to be able to hold up as a high quality starting offensive tackle in the NFL?
Yeah, it's definitely a point worth wondering, and we'll know more once the combine comes around, as far as how his body disposition is and everything. You know, that was the big thing with Orlando Brown, is it's not that he was big, it's that he came in flabby and did really bad in the test, which had people questioning the work ethic and the preparedness coming into it. So I don't think that's going to be the case with Mekhi Becton. I mean, just watching Duke Manyweather's tapes of him, because he's training with Duke Manyweather, looks like he's going to be fine. So overall, though, I think it's interesting. I wish we could have had more time to maybe go in depth more with this offensive tackle class, because right now the consensus is if you don't get a guy in those first 2 rounds, probably don't even bother. Maybe a guy like Alex Lewis, Ben Barch could be one that develops, but at that point, that's a lottery ticket. And 3rd round, you aren't really wanting to take a lottery ticket. Obviously you can, but that's a potential throwaway pick there. So definitely some worries there, and we'll get more into it as we go along. I do wish that he had seen Lucas Niang, Ezra Cleveland, 2 guys that I feel like are being relatively slept on right now. I like their tape much more than the general consensus, or at least the general murmur on them. But it was interesting, and overall, he just reaffirmed that the guy that I think realistically that could fall to Denver that I want the most is Tristan Wirfs. So I'm just going to have my heart set on that until he goes in the top 10 and makes me sad, especially if he goes 10 overall. And that is the pick that the Broncos would have had if it wasn't for Shelby Harris's hand.
Well, yeah, I guess we'll keep that dream going for a couple more months. Man, draft's only 2 months away here. But, all right, any last parting thoughts on anything that he had to bring up?
No, just really appreciate that Jon came on. He obviously used to be with Draft Network and took a hiatus and is back now. And, he, like I said, he's one of the better draft analysts out there, in my opinion. Very thorough. He does really good work with trench work specifically, especially along the defensive line. So going to have to listen to him there and kind of reassess and reevaluate some of what he was saying. And just good to hear his voice, because I used to follow along his podcast. He was on Locked On Draft with Trevor Sikkema for a long time. And Trevor, obviously a very funny dude, but I always thought that Jon brought more of the technical nitty-gritty of the player evaluation down. So really good to get him on here. And heck, maybe we'll get him on again before the draft. I know he's busy at Pewter Report, but again, just really good insight and analysis.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And you're right. That's the nice thing is not all of us have to agree on every evaluation, but it also, like you said, it makes you go back and have to reevaluate, make sure you're seeing things through the right eyes. Maybe there's something that you missed that you didn't see that first time around. It happens. I mean, that's part of the evaluation process. And that's why you can't just get stuck on one guy and say, this has to be the guy. Because
unless their name is Schmisten Schmers, rhymes with it.
Something like that. But yeah, we all get our guys that we fall in love with. I mean, that's why Jerry Jeudy is my Valentine. But
Carl, you abandoned your own morale. You abandoned your own take. You were CD Lamb or bust.
I know I was. I know. And I'm still going back for it because I watched more CD Lamb today. And I saw some things that a second or third time around here, I guess, watching him that I was like, oh, that's kind of nice to see. Just especially his ability when plays break down of what he's doing to try to get himself open. And it's part of why he gets so many balls thrown his way is because of his ability to stay in a play and not just run his route and then give up. But that's a discussion for another day. But great job, Jon. Really appreciate you coming on, buddy. And if you're listening to this last part, Jon, but everybody go follow him because he is worth the follow when it's coming to the draft.
Yep, but that's going to wrap up today's episode of Building the Broncos. Like we said, you can find Jon on Twitter at Ledyard NFL Draft. You can find myself on Twitter at Nick Kendell MHH. And, of course, you can find Carl on Twitter at Carl Dumler MHH. Head on over to milehighhuddle.com, an affiliate of the Maven Coalition and Sports Illustrated. And, again, if you've reached this far, you obviously love us. Go to iTunes, leave us a rating, leave us a comment, because those really go a long way. I keep checking. Haven't had one in the month of February yet. We'd love to have a new comment and rating on there. 3-star, 5-star, 10-star, whatever you can give us. We'll appreciate the feedback. You can follow the Building the Broncos podcast and all our other great audio content by subscribing to Huddle Up Podcast wherever you listen to your shows. You can follow us on Twitter at Mile High Huddle and at BTB Football Pod. For Carl and Jon, I'm Nick, wrapping up another episode of the Building the Broncos podcast. We hope you guys enjoyed it, and we will see you soon. Go Broncos.
You've been listening to Building the Broncos. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com to keep the conversation going.